Steve Harvey. There are names that echo through the halls of American culture, names that conjure laughter, hope, and the promise that no matter how dark the night, dawn will come. Steve Harvey is one of those names. What they're revealing about for millions, he's the king of comedy, the face of Family Feud, the voice that turns ordinary mornings into moments of joy. But behind the dazzling lights, the viral suits, and the thunderous applause, lies a story so raw, so deeply human, that it shatters the myth of untouchable celebrity. At 68, Steve Harvey stands atop an empire built from nothing but grit, faith, and a relentless refusal to surrender. Yet, what the higher the climb, the sharper the winds, and the more invisible the wounds. This is not just a story of success, it's a story of scars, some healed, some still bleeding. What they're revealing isn't about it's a story of a man who gave the world laughter while carrying heartbreak that few could ever imagine. Steve Harvey's journey did not begin in the spotlight. It began in the shadows of poverty, in a coal town where dreams were as rare as comfort. Born in Welch, West Virginia in 1957, Steve was the youngest of 5 children. His father, Jesse, worked the mines, lungs blackened by years underground. While his mother, Eloise, stretched every dollar as a teacher. The Harveys lived on the edge, where every meal was a victory and every winter night a test of endurance. Steve's earliest memories are not of abundance. What they're revealing isn't about but of scarcity, patched clothes, thin blankets, and the cold that crept through the walls. Yet even in those lean years, there was a spark in Steve, a stubborn hope that refused to be smothered. But hope in those days, what they're revealing thing. Steve stuttered as a child, his words tumbling out in broken syllables that drew laughter from classmates and impatience from teachers. The world was not kind to a poor, proud, stuttering black boy in 1960s America. Every day was a gauntlet of ridicule and low expectations. The pain of being mocked, of feeling invisible, carved deep grooves in his spirit. Yet, what there was in that crucible that Steve's resilience was forged. He learned to laugh at himself before others could, to turn pain into punchlines, and to find strength in the very things that made him different. What there is a moment that Steve has never forgotten, a moment that would become the seed of his legend. In elementary school, his teacher asked the class to write down what they wanted to be when they grew up. Steve, what they're revealing on hands, wrote, "I want to be on TV." The room erupted in laughter. The teacher, unable to hide her disbelief, tore his paper in half and called his parents, accusing Steve of arrogance. That night, what they're revealing isn't about his father sat him down and said, "Write it again, put it on your wall, read it every morning and every night." Those words became Steve's anchor. Every setback, every humiliation, was met with the silent promise he made to himself, "I will be on TV." The years that followed were a test of that promise. The Harveys moved to Cleveland, Ohio, while settling on East 112th Street, a neighborhood where opportunity was scarce and hope was a currency few could afford. Steve's adolescence was marked by struggle. He worked odd jobs, delivered newspapers, what therein hustled for every dollar. But the dream never faded. It burned brighter with every obstacle, every door slammed in his face. When he graduated from Glenville High School in 1974, the vow was still alive, but etched into his soul. But dreams, as Steve would learn, are not granted, they are earned, often at a price that few are willing to pay. After high school, he drifted through a series of jobs: mailman, carpet cleaner, insurance salesman, even a brief stint as a boxer. None of them fit. None of them filled the void. The world saw a young man struggling to find his place, but inside, Steve was still that boy clutching a torn piece of paper, whispering a promise to himself in the dark. The turning point came in 1985. In a smoky Cleveland comedy club where the air was thick with anticipation and the crowd hungry for laughter, Steve was dared by a friend to take the stage at an open mic night. With nothing left to lose, he stepped into the spotlight, heart pounding, hands shaking. The first joke stumbled out, then another, and suddenly the room erupted. Laughter, real and unfiltered, washed over him like a baptism. For the first time, Steve felt seen, not as a stuttering boy or a struggling man, but as someone who could command a room, who could turn pain into joy. That night, he walked out with $50 in his pocket and a new sense of purpose burning in his chest. He quit his job the next morning. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like his own. What they're revealing, but destiny rarely offers a straight path. The years that followed were brutal. Steve chased gigs across the country, sleeping in his car, showering at gas stations, and stretching cheap sandwiches across days. The back seat of a 1976 Ford became his home, his sanctuary, and his prison. Nights were long and cold, filled with hunger and doubt. There were moments when surrender seemed easier than survival. But every time despair threatened to swallow him, Steve remembered his father's words, read it again. Make it your promise. That promise became his lifeline, a thread of hope that kept him moving forward when everything else fell apart. It was during these years of hardship that Steve's comedy found its edge. The pain, the loneliness, the humiliation, they all became material. He learned to mine his own life for stories, to find humor in the darkest corners. Audiences responded not just to his jokes, but to his honesty, his vulnerability. He wasn't just making people laugh, he was making them feel seen. In a world that often turns away from struggle, Steve turned his into a spotlight. The breakthrough came in 1990. What they reveal, and Steve was named a finalist in the Johnny Walker National Comedy Search. Suddenly, the doors that had been closed for so long began to open. He landed a spot on Showtime at the Apollo, stepping onto a stage that had launched legends. The same voice that had once cracked with fear now rang out with confidence, cutting through doubt and erupting into applause. For 7 years, Steve hosted Apollo, transforming the show into a cultural phenomenon and himself into a household name. But the climb was steep and the price was high. Success brought new challenges. The schedule was relentless 18-hour days, what they're revealing endless travel and the constant pressure to be on. Steve's body ached, his voice frayed, and his mind teetered on the edge of exhaustion. The world saw a man at the top of his game, but behind the scenes, what they're revealing was fighting to hold it all together. The laughter that filled arenas was often followed by nights of silence, where the weight of responsibility pressed heavy on his chest. He once said, "The laugh you hear is the wound I turned inside out." Every performance demanded a piece of him, every joke a little more blood. Yet even as his star rose, the shadows of his past never fully receded. What their pain of poverty, the sting of ridicule, the ache of missed family moments, they haunted him, reminders of how far he had come and how much he had lost along the way. Steve's first marriage to Marcia, one unraveled under the strain of ambition and absence. The dream that was supposed to lift them up instead pulled them apart. The laughter that filled clubs and theaters was missing at home, replaced by silence and regret. Steve would later admit, "I lost my family chasing the dream." The cost of success was measured not just in dollars, but in birthdays missed, dinners skipped, and the quiet heartbreak of children who wondered why their father was never there. But even in the ruins, Steve found a way to rebuild. He poured his pain into his work, using every setback as fuel. The boy who had once been mocked for dreaming too big now stood as living proof that resilience could turn ridicule into royalty. Yet the higher he climbed, the more he realized that the true measure of a man is not found in applause, but in the scars he carries and the battles he fights in silence. As the 1990s unfolded, Steve Harvey's career soared to new heights. He starred in Me and the Boys. And then, in 1996, The Steve Harvey Show became a cultural landmark, running for 6 successful years. To millions, he was more than a comedian. He was a symbol of hope, a living testament that laughter could rise from the ashes of despair. But the relentless pace of fame was unforgiving. Days blurred into nights, scripts into stand-up routines, and stages into studios. The world saw a man living his dream, but few understood the sacrifices that dream demanded. Fame gave Steve crowns, but it also gave him chains, stealing rest, stealing family dinners, stealing irreplaceable hours with his children. The cost of ambition was steep. At the height of his sitcom success, Steve was known by the world but absent at home. The applause that thundered in studios faded into the silence of hotel rooms, where loneliness echoed louder than any crowd. He confessed that the price of his success was not just exhaustion, but the ache of missed moments, birthdays, school plays, quiet evenings that could never be reclaimed. The man who could make strangers roar with laughter could not stop the tears in his own house. His marriage to Marcia ended in 1994, leaving Steve emotionally and financially stripped. The pain of losing his family was a wound that never fully healed, a reminder that every triumph comes with a shadow. Yet, even as his personal life unraveled, Steve's professional star continued to rise. In 1997, he joined Cedric the Entertainer, D.L. Hewley, and Bernie Mac for the Kings of Comedy tour. Night after night, what they're revealing is shook with laughter and applause. When Spike Lee captured the tour in the 2000 film, The Original Kings of Comedy, Steve's name was etched not just in the history of stand-up, but in the soul of American culture. For a man who once wondered if the world would remember he existed, the sound of entire stadiums chanting his name was almost unbearable in its beauty. Yet, even then, as his heart swelled with pride, his body whispered its warnings: exhaustion, stress, and the quiet toll of carrying a crown too heavy for too long. Steve's impact stretched far beyond the stage. His words, once choked by a stutter, became weapons of healing. In 2009, he poured his hard-earned wisdom into Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, a book that turned scars into guidance and became a New York Times bestseller. The book's success led to a box office hit film and a series of follow-up books, each one a survival map for those still trapped where he once was. Steve's story was no longer just his own. It became a beacon for anyone who had ever been told their dreams were impossible. But even as the honors arrived, Emmys, Image Awards, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, none could erase the memory of those nights spent in the back seat of a car, whispering promises to himself. The climb was never a straight line. For every victory, what they're revealing isn't about, there was a setback. For every moment of glory, a moment of doubt. Steve's journey was not just about rising above, but about surviving the storms that threatened to pull him under. The most public storm came in December 2015, under the glittering lights of the Miss Universe pageant. In a single fateful moment, Steve read the wrong name, crowning the wrong queen in front of millions. What the theater froze, gasp rippled like thunder, and the world watched as Steve's confidence shattered on live television. The memes exploded, headlines declared his career finished, and late-night hosts turned his pain into punchlines. Steve walked off stage into a silence far colder than any crowd, carrying the weight of a billion mocking eyes. What their revealer admitted that in the lonely hours that followed, he wondered if his life's work had been undone in 60 seconds. But where others might have hidden, Steve did the unthinkable. What they returned to host Miss Universe the very next year. Scarred but unbroken, he stepped back under the lights, not for the crown or the applause, but to reclaim his voice. In that moment, what they're revealing of Steve Harvey proved that honor is not measured by perfection, but by the courage to rise when the world laughs at your fall. But the spotlight, as Steve Harvey learned, is a double-edged sword. The world that once cheered his every move now scrutinized his every word. In the age of social media, every slip, every offhand comment could ignite a firestorm. Steve's unfiltered honesty, what the very trait that made him beloved, sometimes became a liability. Headlines magnified his mistakes, and the digital world, quick to judge, often forgot the humanity behind the icon. Each controversy, each backlash, what they're revealing about was a fresh wound, a reminder that the higher you rise, the more exposed you become. Yet Steve refused to let public opinion define him. What they're revealing about, he faced each storm with the same resilience that had carried him from the coal towns of West Virginia to the heights of Hollywood. He owned his mistakes, apologized when he was wrong. What they're revealing never shied away from the hard conversations. Every time I thought I'd reached the end, he reflected, God showed me I was just turning the page. For Steve, failure was never final. It was simply another chapter, another lesson, another chance to grow. Behind the scenes, however, the battles were even more personal. Steve's second marriage to Mary Shackelford began with hope but ended in public heartbreak. The divorce was messy, played out in tabloids and courtrooms, with accusations that slashed at Steve's reputation. The pain was not just legal or financial, it was deeply emotional. Their son, Winton, became a symbol of both love and loss, a reminder of the family Steve longed to protect but struggled to hold together. The wounds of that chapter ran deep, leaving scars that would take years to heal. Financial storms followed close behind. In 2005, reeling from divorce and legal battles, Steve discovered a devastating truth. For 7 years, his taxes had gone unfiled due to a disastrous accounting failure. The penalties and interest ballooned into a mountain of debt that threatened to erase everything he had built. What for a man whose face filled billboards and whose voice filled arenas, the humiliation was crushing. Steve admitted what they revealed about. It was humiliating to have the world believe you're rich while you can't even breathe. The fear of losing everything, his home, his career, his dignity, was a shadow that haunted him day and night. But Steve Harvey is nothing if not a fighter. He built a plan as relentless as hunger itself. Long before sunrise, he was in the studio, his voice carrying over the airwaves on his morning radio show. Every joke, every story was paid for in fear, but fear kept him moving. He worked until his body staggered, radio in the morning, meetings by day, stages by night. There was no luxury, no pause, only the grind. Out of that grind came his books, each page a brick in the wall that kept creditors at bay. Slowly, painfully, dollar by dollar, performance by performance, he clawed his way out of debt. The climb back was brutal, but it was also transformative. Steve rebuilt more than his finances. He rebuilt his dignity, his discipline, and his faith. The chapter of 1,707 years of taxes was never just about numbers. It was about shame, survival, and the terror of failing his children, but it was also about what happens next. On his knees he prayed, from his knees he fought, and when he rose he carried scars that spoke louder than any punchline. That faith, discipline, and unbreakable will can turn the weight of ruin into the very foundation of redemption. By the mid-2000s, Steve Harvey stood on stages that millions envied, but offstage, what their revered wounds no spotlight could heal. 2 broken marriages, children who had watched him walk away, nights of debt that nearly crushed him, and the hollowness of a man who could make the world roar with laughter yet cry alone in silence. Survival had kept him breathing, but survival is not the same as living. It was in this emptiness that Steve met Marjorie Bridges, the woman who would become his anchor, his partner, and the quiet miracle that turned his house into a home. Marjorie Bridges entered Steve Harvey's life at a time when he was battered by storms, both public and private. Their story felt almost scripted by fate. Years earlier in Memphis, Steve had looked down from a stage. What they're revealing isn't about in the crowd, and declared, "I don't know who you are, but I'm going to marry you one day." Life pulled them apart then, but destiny had other plans. In 2005, there with Steve bruised by scandal and nearly broken in spirit, they found each other again. 2 years later, at 50 years old, Steve married Marjorie, and with that vow, he found not just a wife but redemption. Marjorie did what fame, money, and television never could. She steadied him. Where he had been frantic, she brought calm. Where he felt fractured, she made him whole. What they're revealing isn't about she urged him to rest when he would have worked through the night, reminded him to eat when his body bore the strain of endless shows, and whispered prayers over him when he doubted himself. Steve has often said, "What a revidi, 5% of everything I have came after I married her." He wasn't talking about wealth, he was talking about peace, the priceless treasure of coming home not to silence, but to laughter around the dinner table. Together, they built something larger than themselves, a blended family of 7. Steve's 3 children, Marjorie's 3, and their youngest, Winton, under one roof. But at first, there were hesitations, the natural distance of stepchildren and the scars of old wounds. But Steve refused to let the word step define them. He gave Marjorie's children his last name, and slowly, what they're revealing through consistency and love, they gave him their trust. He learned to show up for them not with grand gestures, but with constancy. Car rides to school, quiet talks before bed, dinners where he listened more than he spoke. He was not just their provider, he became their protector, their father. The world witnessed that bond in 2015 during a televised tribute. Jason, Marjorie's son, turned to Steve and said, "You gave me your last name. There's no one better than you, Dad." The auditorium stilled. Cameras caught Steve's face as he broke, sobbing, not as a comedian or host, but as a man finally forgiven. For someone who had once whispered, "I lost my first family chasing the dream." Those words were not just affection. They were grace, absolution, healing made visible. Life with Marjorie gave Steve what no crown of fame ever could, the quiet miracles of belonging. Evenings when he came home and found his family waiting at the table. Birthdays where every child, biological and adopted, they're revealing it about stood together as one. Vacations where he was not Steve Harvey the icon, but simply Dad. He often says Marjorie saved him, but perhaps the deeper truth is this: she reminded him that he was worth saving. Today, when Steve surveys the mansions, the awards, the shows that bear his name, he insists none of it compares to what he found in her. The man who once slept in a car, who once feared he had lost every family he could ever have, now sits at a table surrounded by children who believe in him. Marjorie turned his house into a home, his regrets into lessons, his scars into stories of healing. For Steve Harvey, marrying Marjorie was not just another chapter. It was the chapter, the moment survival became joy, the moment shame became grace, the moment a man who had nearly lost everything discovered the quiet, ordinary, miraculous truth of having it all. But even as Steve found peace at home, the world outside demanded more. His career, they're revealing, spanning continents and industries, required a new kind of discipline. The boy who once feared hunger now faced the challenge of maintaining an empire. The stakes were higher, the responsibilities greater, and the pressure to keep moving forward never truly faded. Yet, with Marjorie by his side, Steve learned that true strength is not measured by how much you can carry alone, but by who stands with you when the weight becomes too much to bear. Now, at 68, Steve Harvey stands as the architect of a legacy that stretches far beyond the boundaries of television or comedy. His name is etched into the fabric of American culture not just as a performer, but as a survivor, a mentor, and a patriarch. Since 2010, he has been the face of family Feud, elevating the show to new heights and bringing laughter into millions of homes. The spin-off, Celebrity Family Feud, continues to thrive, and his morning radio show remains a daily ritual for countless listeners. What they're revealing through his company, Steve Harvey Global, he has expanded his reach to Africa, licensing Family Feud in South Africa, Ghana, and soon Botswana, where he will personally host the new version. His ventures into health and entrepreneurship like Elevate You reflect a man who refuses to be defined by a single success or a single failure. But behind the empire, the mansions, and the accolades, what they're revealing isn't Steve Harvey's greatest battle is now with time itself. The years of relentless hustle have left their mark. He has spoken openly about high blood pressure, sleep apnea, and the constant vigilance required to maintain his health. The discipline that once pulled him out of poverty now keeps him alive. He trains daily, eats with precision, and guards his rest as fiercely as he once guarded his dreams. The man who once survived on hope and hustle now survives on routine and resolve. Yet, even in the midst of abundance, the old fears linger. I still think about 1-700. He confesses the number now less about money than about memory, a reminder of how fragile security can be. The world still sees the suits, the cars, the laughter. What they're revealing isn't about, but Steve knows that true wealth is measured in moments, not material. It's the dinners where every child, biological and adopted, sits at the same table. It's the mornings when grandchildren run through hallways, what they revere, laughter echoing louder than any applause. It's the quiet evenings with Marjorie, the woman who turned his house into a home. These are the treasures that endure, the legacy that outlasts fame. Yet, the tragedy of Steve Harvey is not found in his failures, but in the cost of his triumphs. Every scar tells a story of dreams torn and rebuilt, of families lost and found, of battles fought in silence. The boy who once stuttered in a Cleveland classroom now commands stages across the world, but the echoes of those early wounds never fully fade. The pain of missed birthdays, the regret of broken marriages, the loneliness that sometimes creeps in even when surrounded by millions. These are the shadows that linger behind the spotlight. But perhaps that is what makes Steve Harvey's story so powerful, so heartbreakingly human. He is not a man untouched by suffering, but a man who has learned to turn suffering into strength. He has shown that resilience is not the absence of pain, but the refusal to be defined by it. That greatness is not measured by applause, but by the courage to rise again and again, no matter how many times the world tries to knock you down. Steve Harvey's life is a testament to the power of faith, discipline, and relentless hope. He has built an empire, yes, but more importantly, he has built a life marked by second chances, by forgiveness, by the quiet grace of starting over. He has taught us that no scar is final, that no mistake is fatal, and that the story is never over until you choose to write it with love. So as Steve Harvey enters the twilight of his career, the question is not what he has achieved, but what he has overcome. The tragedy is not in the heartbreak, but in the beauty that has risen from it. The boy who once doubted his voice now uses it to lift others, to remind the world that healing is possible, that hope is real, and that the greatest legacy is not found in trophies or titles, but in the lives we touch and the love we leave behind. If Steve Harvey's story has ever touched you, if you have ever found hope in his laughter or strength in his scars, share your reflection below. Your words may be the reminder someone else needs, that healing is possible, that no scar is final, and that the story is never over until you choose to write it with love.